Thanks, Katie. You know, it's always such a grand pleasure for me to get up on a platform and look out at a sea of so many wonderfully accomplished women. And I can't help but always go back to the early 70s, one of my favorite vignettes from the beginning of Saturday Night Live, before some of you were even born. And there was a wonderful takeoff then, in the early 70s, of what was becoming the Madison Avenue version of the modern Superwoman. And it was a spoof on an advertisement. And it showed a woman who was beautifully made up, her hair was perfect, her clothes were gorgeous, walking into a 5,000 square foot kitchen that was immaculately clean, with 3 bags of groceries. She put them down on a counter, she started to unpack them, looked at the camera, and she said, "Hi, I'm a biophysicist and a mother of 4. And she kept unpacking the groceries, and she said, "What's that? Oh, my favorite hobbies. Well, my favorites would have to be skydiving and deep-sea diving." She finished unpacking the groceries and took the bags and folded them up very neatly, opened up a cabinet with 4,000 neatly folded bags, and closed the door, looked back at the camera, and she said, "What? Oh, you wonder how I do all of this? I'm on speed." I thought, now that's an effective ad. But the fact of the matter is, in the end, it was true, because we're all on speed. We couldn't do what we do if we weren't on speed. And in fact, what's happening now is the speed of change is accelerating so quickly that that's what we have to deal with. We do a lot of reading, a lot of analysis, we develop a lot of papers, and there was a paper that we developed just a few months back that we called Templosion. Very frequently we find ourselves in the vocabulary business. We have to make up words because where we're heading in the future, if we use the same vocabulary we used to, we just can't get the real new meaning. We get stuck with old ones. So we created this term Templosion, and it is the implosion of time. What's happening is that the biggest things are now taking the smallest amount of time. And I just want to notch off a few for you. The average lifespan of a Fortune 500 company is starting to become 15 years. Major companies like Borders and Circuit City and Blockbuster are kind of here and gone. The time it takes a young computer guru to raise large amounts of money has totally collapsed. And not too many months back, a 13-person team was acquired for $1 billion. It had no revenue in a deal that took less than 48 hours to complete. High-performance computing, HPC, which is the advanced computing that is used to basically model the dynamics of weather, of black holes, of combustion, is now being made available to any small manufacturing firm. Hackers can take down huge official websites, even government websites, in smaller and smaller amounts of time. Words have been dying more often in the past 10 to 20 years than they have in all the time measured before. Whole languages now require less than a generation to drastically evolve. In less than 10 years, since 2007, the Arctic is becoming completely transformed into a totally new global shipping lane. Quantum computing is advancing at an accelerating, geometrically accelerating pace. And that's not a mistake. I meant to say that. Geometrically accelerating pace. And many of you have been reading about 3D printing and what's going on there. And that's coming on very, very quickly. Within the next few years, with 3D printing, we will see at-home ability to manufacture everything from pharmaceuticals to weapons to body parts. The entire genome is coming to be mapped so fast now that doctors can prescribe sequencing as routinely as they do MRIs or blood cell counts. I could go on and on. I've just given you a very small sampling of the thousands of things that are so big that take no time. And this constant onrush of time, so much more quickly than ever before, is creating a whole new world. And while we hear a lot of talk about the fact that we've been in a recession, are we getting out of the recession? What's happening with the recession? In our shop, we don't believe it ever was a recession. We believe that what we have been going through is a fundamental economic global transformation. It was not unforeseen. We saw it coming in 1992. We predicted it almost to the year. We said in 2005 we would begin to see waves of unemployment around the world that would be very, very painful. And how we came to that is because we've been through these transformations before in history. We went from the agricultural era to the industrial era because of technologies that created disruptions and created efficiencies. We went from the industrial era to the post-industrial era because of disruptive technologies that created enormous efficiencies. It happened again in 1992. We had enormous layoffs everywhere because of these disruptive technologies that created efficiencies. We named the new economy then, we called it the immotile economy, but we said in 1992 that if this keeps going on at this accelerating pace, we're lucky if we make it to 2005 without the new things coming along that will begin to create a decade of severe unemployment around the world. And we even wrote that in a book in 1992. There was nothing unpredictable about this. But do you see the pattern here? Thousands, tens of thousands of years in agriculture, less than 200 in industrial, 45 in post-industrial, and maybe 25 before the immotile plays out, and the half point of that where the next begins. And we call it the metaspace economy, and I'm not going to go into it today. But I just want to put in context for you the speed with which things are changing and the fact that they are fundamentally changing. The future is not the present. It is not yesterday. Today isn't even yesterday. So in the little time that we have together, I'm going to race through 10 things that I want to notch for you to understand in the work that you do and why we're here today. First, we're going to continue to see many people unemployed. The old jobs are not returning. New jobs will be created. There's no question about that. But in the end, the new businesses are going to be leaner and with fewer employees. The second point to add to that is that we're living in a time of an extended mortality horizon. That means that the time between when the first 5% of your age cohort dies out and the last 5% of your age cohort dies out is your mortality horizon, and today that extends from age 50 to age 100. Now, isn't that interesting? 1 in 9 baby boomers in the United States is projected to live to be 100 years old. How do you sustain yourself when we have a whole psychology that 65 is when we should be retiring, which, by the way, was an age set by Otto von Bismarck in the 1870s, because the average life expectancy of the adult male or the adult male worker or member of the armed forces, no women involved, was somewhere around 63, 64. And so Otto figured that if you lived to 65, you were entitled to a couple of months off before you dropped dead. So we're living so much longer, which means that at the end of our lives, we have to look to so much more self-reliance and so much more entrepreneurialism, but so do the young. This self-reliance, this entrepreneurial spirit, is the only thing that is going to sustain us economically, because being employed by somebody is not going to be there for everyone. And yet we don't train this. We don't teach this. We don't start early enough. We have high school guidance counselors that only know how to send someone on to college. They don't have a clue from early ages on up how to teach you to rely on yourself. I have so many people who come to me and say, Edie, my son, my daughter just graduated from college, and now she wants to be a ski instructor in Aspen. He wants to manage a rock band. And I know their pain because my son is 33. 18 years ago, 15, whenever it was, when I spent $250,000 after tax money to send him on the 4-year sabbatical to write the great American novel From Beer to Fraternity. I know that. And it is painful when they come out and this is what they tell you. And I say, if that's your issue, don't send your kid to me. I'll tell you why. Because this kid has 65 years of work life ahead of him or her, not like us. If you want to manage a rock band, better to do it in your 20s than in your 80s. So, the third point that I want to make is that our education system is so pathetically antiquated. So pathetically antiquated. It was designed for an industrial economy. Let's start with what we know from mapping the human brain. We're doing so much in brain imaging now, and what we are finding is astounding. We have known for several decades, one thing for sure, then those are the many physiological distinctions between the male and the female brain. It turns out that we all begin life with a female brain within 5 to 6 weeks after conception. The male organism is programmed to shoot a much higher dose of testosterone throughout it, priming the male to go on to develop not only outer body parts, but brain development in a male fashion. The female goes on to develop 10 to 20 more connections in the corpus callosum between the left and the right hemisphere. The second time that differentiation occurs is in adolescence, when the boy has a much more higher dose of testosterone shot through it, and at which point what happens is that the spatial conceptual capacities of the brains begin to differentiate yet again. And that's when even the brightest girls find themselves not able to keep up with the brightest boys in physics and math. Now, if we are serious about STEM, not only in terms of boys, but also girls, why aren't we paying attention to this research? Because this research tells us, and there's plenty of it now, that boys and girls learn differently. That boys are penalized in early education because they learn better visually and abstractly. So verbal teaching is not good for them, so many boys wind up in special ed. And then later, in teaching physics and mathematics at the higher levels, girls are penalized because these things are taught in such abstract ways with no context or understanding that they just don't capture them. They're not interested. Well, we should be paying attention to this and doing something different. Also with regard to brain research, we know that the human brain grows most of its connections most rapidly before the age of 3. When I was an infant, if somebody said coochie coochie coo to me 3 times a day, that was high stimulation. My son had a mobile in his crib. He had a toy in his stroller. He had a playpen full of toys and a bedroom full of toys. My grandnephews and grandnieces, they have 4 mobiles in their crib, bumper guards that honk and squeak and reflect. They don't have playpens because they don't stay in playpens. So the entire room is filled with toys. The house is filled with toys. The back of the car has not only toys, but video screens. And the stroller weighs 450 pounds. And then by the time they are 6 years old, they not only have toy cell phones, but they're playing with their parents' real cell phones. And by the time they're 9 months old, they have toy computers. And by a year and a half, real computers, and they're accessing porn sites. And then when they're 5 years old, we send them to the same schools that our great-great-great-grandparents went to. And if their new brains that we have charged up cannot match those slow old school systems, instead of fundamentally changing our education processes, we drug the kids. What is up with this? And I'm asked all the time, should we be taking the best teachers in the world and have them come on the internet and teach biology so that 1 million kids can enroll in the class, not just 200? Well, how antiquated is this? Why would you want a teacher coming on the internet and teaching biology when through virtual reality, immersion technology, and gaming technology, you could become a white blood corpuscle, swim through the bloodstream, fight off everything that's invading in there, and in 10 minutes learn more about immunity, having fun, than any teacher can teach you in 20 hours of lecture? Why would you want an archaeology teacher when you can live in an ancient civilization? We need guides in the future. We are moving from education to learning, and the systems haven't gotten that yet. And when we get learning right, we will capture all of our children differently, because they will be engaged, and they will be passionate, and they will be involved. So that brings me to my fourth point, which is, and this is one of my soapboxes, and some of you will absolutely not agree with this. I know it's highly controversial. I do not believe that everyone belongs in college. I think there are so many skills and aptitudes, creative possibilities that our young people possess that are being denigrated completely because we force them into an academic silo that says if you don't go to college, you are not wanted in this economy. And what happens as a result? So many of them drop out and are lost to us forever. This is not appropriate. It's not right. So we move to basically point 5, which is we're looking at what some people call a she-economy, where women are now out-earning men. In more than 50% of all households in this country, women are breadwinners. In more than 1 in 4 where there's dual incomes, women are breadwinners. But in 3 out of 4 where women are professionals or executives, they are the chief breadwinners in their households, either because they out-earn their significant others or they're the only one. So this is very new. And all of a sudden what this means is that our children take on a very different economic importance to us. Because when we had issues of autism before, the woman would stay home and take care of the child. But today, these kinds of issues are bankrupting families because the woman can't work and deal with this at the same time. So we have to take a look at what it means as women move into those centerpieces, which moves us down to point number 6, which is that today boys are in trouble. Without any question. They're dropping out of school, they are feeling unimportant, and this is going to have huge implications for girls and for women. Because the mothers, the sisters, the girlfriends, the wives, this is what society is all about, this is what we are all about, and the other half is having significant issues. So that takes us to point number 7, which is that whether we're talking about young girls or young boys, when we start talking about intervening younger in their lives, one of the things we talk about is instilling self-esteem. I fell into that trap. I actually created a program that was great except for the name. I called it the Esteem Teams because I felt that what these girls needed was self-esteem. I myself grew up in foster homes in the worst neighborhood in New York City, East New York. I went to the worst schools. And so as an adult, I wanted to reach in and grab out and give something back to the girls that were me when I was younger. I really don't think I had a problem with self-esteem. A little. But I said this was about esteem. Recent research has shown that young people in prisons are very high in self-esteem. Very high. They think a lot of themselves and think basically that the world should come to them. They don't have to deal with the world. And in fact, we know that there are a lot of kids who have way too much self-esteem. No humility, and they think they're better than every other kid. Part of that is because we set the bar very low and then we give a party when they jump over it. And so there is plenty of self-esteem to go around. That is not the issue. When I was a kid, we didn't have organized sports. You played out on the street, and you got picked to play if you were good, and if you weren't picked to play. So you went home and you practiced on your violin or you played with your chemistry set. Today, soccer moms everywhere have their sons and daughters sitting on benches in playgrounds. They get to play whether they're good or not. They're patted on the head. They're given awards. And we wonder why it is we wake up today and we have an issue with not enough violinists and chemists and a whole country full of sucky soccer players. And then we move to point number 8, which is urbanization. A few years ago, we passed a global mark, and we have more people now living in cities than not living in cities. What some bioscientists are saying now is that instead of studying chimpanzee colonies, to understand how we will adapt in the future, we have to study ant colonies. Now, isn't that interesting? How do we deal with our young girls and our young boys in a future in which instead of even thinking about how primates might live, we have to think about colonies of ants might live? And then the ninth point is this. As far as I'm concerned, it all comes down to replacing the negative scenarios about the future with positive ones. I'm not really a Pollyanna. I'm a practical person and a realist. And I believe that if you put negative visions in front of a society, all of the negative science fiction we're looking at, all of the problems that we're looking at with oceans, water, food, climate change, terrorism, cyber terrorism, financial grids taken down, energy, you keep putting that negativity out there en masse in front of young people, what do you think they're going to feel about growing up? How do you think they're going to feel their future looks? We need to change the story and start making it positive and optimistic and start putting those inspirational scenarios out there. And so now that I'm down to absolute zero in my time with you, I'm just going to sum up with this last point. When I look at the world, I try to make it very simple so that I can understand it and communicate it to others. And we see some things as an analogy with three-legged stools. First, let's take our country, the Republic. Our country is a three-legged stool, the seat of which is the Republic, and the three legs are individual responsibility, institutional accountability, and charity. And when those three are in balance, the Republic works well. On the right and on the left, there are different agendas. As far as the left is concerned, they would like to shorten individual responsibility, lengthen institutional accountability, and lengthen charity. On the right, the desire is to greatly lengthen individual responsibility, shorten institutional accountability, and take the charity leg, cut it in two, and cleave half of it to moral values. Under neither of those scenarios does the Republic balance. If we want people to take responsibility for themselves, then our institutions had better be governed correctly, and then an equal measure of charity for those that cannot speak for themselves. The other three-legged stool that really impresses me is the male versus female, and this is what I'm going to leave you with today. If we look at brain imaging, and if we understand the differences in the male and female brain, we might just kind of stereotypically create two different three-legged stools that sum up everything. The first is the male. The seat of the male stool is the economy, and the three legs are transportation, infrastructure, communications infrastructure, and capital formation. And the belief is that if you strengthen those three legs enough, you strengthen the seat so much so that more and more people can pile up higher and higher and higher. And then you move over to the female stool, the seat of which is not the economy, but the society. And the three legs are health, education, and ecological integrity. And the belief is that if you strengthen those three legs, you grow the seat so much so that more and more people can pile on side by side. Neither one of those is correct or can work without the other. What is the point of having all of the great health care in the world if you can't get it to where it has to go? And what is the point of having all the capital formation if you're not educating the next generation? And so my hope is that the foundation and all of you in your lives every day work somehow to build the six-legged chaise lounge. Thank you.